Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Ken Hodgkins. Ken is the co-chair of the Off-World Approach for the Hague Institute for Global Justice. For many years, he was the Director Office of Space and Advanced Technology for the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. representative for the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. He is also the recipient of several awards, including the International Academy of Astronautics Award for lasting contribution to the advancement of the astronautical sciences and the Secretary of State's Career Achievement Award. Ken, welcome to the Future Space.
Well, it's a real pleasure, Daniel, to join you. I look forward to our conversation.
Me too. Me too. There's like such interesting work that you're doing with the Hague Institute and the culmination of a lifelong career. But before we get there, could you share with us three words that for you capture the essence of space?
Disruptive in a positive sense, opportunity, and universal. And there are many aspects to that I'd love to talk about.
Absolutely. Were these, do you think that, I mean, you've been in the industry for a long time. If I had asked you the question 20 years ago, would space be these three words, or if they have evolved and changed over your career?
But they probably not. I don't think those. I would have picked those three words. I think maybe it would have been more, awe-inspiring and things like that because there was so much going on. When I joined the federal government, there were three remote sensing satellites: Landsat 1, 2, and 3, and a handful of meteorological satellites. And the space shuttle hadn't been launched yet, and I mean we had scientific missions. So things have changed radically since that time, and I think that the three words I chose was more kind of capturing the evolution of the space enterprise over the past 40 years and where we are now.
Now, there is obviously a science story, there's a technology story, a geopolitical story. But if I ask you, what is the human story of going to space? What would that resonate for you?
Well, if one of the words I chose specifically on this whole notion of universal, it gets to the human part of it. Obviously, you can point to things that are directly relatable to the average person on the street, whether it's a cell phone using satellite navigation and communications, or it's getting nice pictures of the Earth, or watching storm systems. But what I'm seeing now, and what I'm thinking more and more about in that regard, is kind of the cultural part of space. And when I say universal, what do I mean? I'm looking at the idea that if we're going to move to a global space economy, that means everybody is going to have to be part of that. So, why I asked the question, why aren't we inspiring carpenters and plumbers and electricians to want to be in space? Because we're going to need all of those types of skills. Um, if you're in the investment sector, why isn't a space investment your first order priority as opposed to something that you use with kind of excess capital that you might have sitting there? So if you look at it in terms of we're moving to a global space economy, and I use that in the most general sense because there is a lot of other aspects to it. Then what does it mean to create the space culture to kind of support that? And I think for me, that's been the biggest change over the past 40 years is moving into that way of thinking, which I think is going to be critical for all of us to take advantage of space exploration and low Earth orbit and beyond.
I mean, if we go back to, the beginning of the space race, all of it was more of a geopolitical um, move. It was not really about the human experience. It was more about making a statement. And once that first step on the moon was achieved, then the motivation to go back kind of disappeared, and the technology and the science, or the technology, was not able to keep up that um, with that motivation at the beginning, right? That geopolitical motivation. And so there was this kind of dip where only the government was able to sustain that interest, because for the corporate or for the business or for the commercial, it made absolutely no sense until very recently now, where we have the economics that have caught up and the technology that have caught up. And now we can look into the next phase. How do we transfer the human experience from the planet, from on the planet, to in low orbit or beyond? Because great, there's a science component, there's a technology that's going to be fun, but if we want to look into going beyond, there's a human experience that we need to bring. And you were talking about the carpenter, and everything that composes the human experience on Earth has to migrate up there. And in the same way that, back in the days of the great migration from Europe to North America, at the beginning you had the explorers. It was resource based, right? The thing that motivated these countries, a kingdom, to invest, was because they needed resources and new territories. And it was really rough at the beginning, but ultimately, for the people to come, it was the promise of continuing or starting fresh from where they were, and giving them the opportunity to be human, and to expand. And this is obviously the goal that we have, moving beyond the silo of what the space industry has been for so long, now expanding. And I'm really happy to see companies like Prada that are getting into that narrative, and where Axum, all these brands, or these actors that usually are not connected to it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what's interesting, when you were talking about the geopolitical aspects of space, when I was at the State Department, space was viewed as a tool of foreign policy. When we had heads of state come to the U.S., the first question is what agreements can we sign, and it was the totality, obviously, of those were things that NASA could do with other countries. But the real change was with the fall of the Soviet Union, and with that, at least for the United States, we made a decision that we would open up the launch market to Russia, which meant that you had people had more and more opportunity to get stuff into space. And that really, I think, changed the landscape radically, because systems like Iridium and Global Star were able to launch, I'm using them as an example, from the Soviet Union. Before that, they didn't have that opportunity. And you had a lack of capacity to launch things into space. So all of a sudden, companies looked at this opportunity. I can start launching things. Universities began looking at that opportunity to build small sats, launch them from Russia. And I think that opened up all kinds of opportunities, which was the other word I had chosen. Opportunities to do things that you were constrained from physical limitations. When I say physical, either foreign policy limitations, or just the fact that there wasn't enough launch capability to get things up, and you were always in the queue, and the people that paid the most for launches were the first to get up there. So now you have this. Now you have a wide open capability or capacity for people to get into space, which then begins the whole process of new things coming up, and then new opportunities. So you mentioned Prada. I mean, Prada was not going up on the International Space Station. Uh, people were not looking at those types of activities. I mean, there might have been a few isolated incidents, but you don't have a business plan now being developed that is based on being able to get into space, and it goes beyond that whole issue of spin-offs. Everybody's familiar with the Tang drink being used on by the astronauts, or Teflon, or things like that. Now you have people that are able to say, I'm going to build a business plan on something I want to do. And that business plan is at the heart will be space, for things that you don't typically associate with space. So you have that opportunity. And then I get to the other word, the disruption, the disruptive thinking that now can be interjected into anything that you're doing, whether it's scientific or technical, or um, sociological, or commercial. Now you have an entire capability up there that you didn't have before. And that whole notion, as you alluded to, a migration from Europe, across the oceans to the United States. Uh, a lot of people are thinking in those terms, about space, and will that be open for, again, the average person to go up into space, beyond just going up and enjoying it for a few minutes and then coming back, but actually staying up there for an extended period of time, which again opens up all new a whole slew of other opportunities that we aren't even cognizant of today.
And obviously, we're not talking like these things are not going to happen in 25 years. We're not talking about an entire society that lives in low orbit, but we're talking about the direction that the humans, that our species is going and taking. I mean, if we make the parallel of the migration from Europe to America, it took several hundred years until new economies were in place and the average person was also present. So when we talk about that vision of the future, it's obviously a long term reality, but we have to talk about that long terms so that we can establish the short term foundation to shape the narrative. And this is where you are with the Hague Institute for Global Justice and the off-world approach. Is there's again understanding of what needs to be done on the technology aspect of it, the politics, the legal aspect of it, and the legislation aspect of it are still missing, right? I think the last big agreement that we have goes back to 1967, the outer space agreement, back in the days where the Concorde was just conceptual. And now we have the Artemis Accord, who out of all the countries on the world, there's only 39, I think, who have signed, and China and Russia are not part of it. And now the Hague Institute for Global Justice with the off-world is trying a little different approach. Can you share with us what is the philosophy and the work and the mission of what you're working at?
The space enterprise was a government monopoly for decades and decades, and then now it no longer is. So if you accept that notion that the commercial sector, or I'll use the phrase civil society, is driving the space agenda, and that we're moving to this global space economy, then we had decided that we need to look at a new paradigm in thinking in terms of governance. Now, a lot of people get very antsy about governance, and are we going to be negotiating new treaties and regulations and all of that, which is all part of the equation. But it's more, what are going to be kind of the fundamental rules that are cross-cutting for no matter what you do in space. And with the off-world approach and the Washington Compact on norms of behavior for commercial space operations, a document that we've developed, and I'll just put a plug in for. We have 130 signatories from around the world from civil society signing on to it. What we wanted to do is suggest that maybe now is the time for civil society to invest in kind of the intellectual firepower that's going to be needed to drive humans into space. And we've also, we also took the view that we can't wait for governments to come to those decisions because of a variety of things. There are priorities that governments have. There are the geopolitical situation, but the space enterprise is not going to wait for those things to be resolved. So if governments aren't keeping pace with technological developments, with the commercial developments, then you have a decision making vacuum. And why not have civil society sit down and say, these are the things that we believe are important, and this is how we want to behave. And if they translate into domestic or international instruments, that's good. But we want to use these things as a point of departure. And those kind of fundamentals that we've incorporated in the compact is transparency, predictability, interoperability, and sustainability. And then from those general concepts, no matter what sector you're in, various things can flow down from there. So the compact is universal in the sense that it's applicable no matter what you're doing in space. Um, it it it's not focused on one sector or another, so it means that there are principles here that everybody shares, no matter what it is that you're doing. And then, if in a particular sector you believe there's more work that needs to be done, then you certainly can pursue that within the framework of the compact. But it really is a different way of looking at this, and it's going to really require a change in the mindset of of that whole notion of governance, and that is, who is going to be sitting at the table. Is it going to be the civil society sitting at the table and the government's observing, or is it the government sitting at the table and civil society observing? We think both can happen, and where they intersect, that's a good thing. So it is kind of an exciting um, it's an exciting concept to start thinking about. But again, in the end, if you think about people going into space, much like explorers went to other places, eventually the people that are there have to make the decisions, and they have to interact, and um, they have to interact among themselves. They can't wait for a letter from home telling them what to do. They have to do it there on the spot, and that's kind of the notion that we want to engender in what we're doing with the compact.
There's I have a feeling that the back in the days of ocean exploration, the Shackleton days, the Captain Scott Amundsen, there was a general fascination about um, going to new places. Right, the public was looking towards these explorers and living through them, and also there was an excitement about establishing yourself into these new places. I have a feel that today it's a little bit kind of the opposite. We collectively, I think that our exploration is a negative aspect. Right? We've contaminated. We've messed up one planet. So now we cannot even think of going to these new places. And that has created kind of a complacency of let's not go over there, let's not do that. But what also it does is that it leaves the opportunity for others to actually go and set their own values or set their own vision. And whether it's Antarctica, because right now there's a big debate about Antarctica, the technology is allowing us to increase the number of visitors because now you can do it with more comfort, and you don't have to worry too much about the Drake Passage. So the visitors are increasing a lot, and a lot of people are saying this should be close to people, right? This should be not accessible. And then you have the other side of it, which is they're saying no, it's happening, right? And we should not forbade people to go and experience it. Let's figure it out more how to manage the development and the growth so that we can have national parks, we can have places that you can go, but you cannot close the gates, right? Once these things are going. And it's the same thing for space. It is going. China is going. Russia is trying to grab its glory days again. But China is the big player in this. And you have all these other countries. And if we're not being an active leader in shaping that narrative, then others will create that story or these values or these principles, and that might actually come at our own expense. And this is where, like, we have to reconnect with that, the work that is needed even in our democracy. I think that we've taken, we're talking a little bit earlier, we've we're taking our society for granted. We think that now our institutions, our rights, there's not a lot of work that needs to be done. They're coming to us, but it's the opposite. Being a citizen into a democratic or in a society demands and participation. And if we want to make the vision of the world that we have a reality, then there's work that has to be done, and that's where you're at, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is the examples you've used about going to the Antarctic and going to other places, that whole sense of exploring for the sake of exploring and reporting back to the Academy of Explorers or whatever. You're right. A lot of that was just the idea of doing something really, really exciting that will catch the general public's attention once you get back from your 2 year tour through Africa or whatever. But with space, it's an entirely different matter, in the sense that, again, going to Antarctica, there was no international body that said, yeah, let's go to Antarctica and here are kind of the rules of the road. But with space, we had this 1967 Outer Space Treaty where we realized that we probably do want to have some rules up there, but that was all caught up in Cold War, the Cold War dynamics. But what was interesting about the Outer Space Treaty is that while it was an intergovernmental treaty, and governments pretty had the monopoly on space activities, it recognized it would be non-governmental activities in space. I mean, personally, I make the case, and I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that in Article 6, where it talks about the authorization and supervision of national activities in space, including non-governmental entities, all but said we want non-governmental entities up there. Now, at the time, there was a big debate between the East and the West about private property, private enterprise, and things of that nature. But in essence, the government said anybody can go to space. I can go to space individually. However, the government will have to authorize and supervise you. Now, this is a really interesting dynamic, because while the treaty says everybody has access to space, in essence, your biggest limitation is your own government, because your own government can say, no, you can't go to space, or you can go except under all of these conditions. And so you're going to have to strike this balance between the desire to explore, the desire to do different things going into space, but you still need a launching state, and there are only a handful of those currently in the world. And then you need your government to say, yes, I authorize and I supervise this. Now, where I see a difference is that the excitement of seeing somebody go into space is still exciting, but it has a certain shelf life to it. So in my view, what's really driving our push to go into space is the economic opportunities that are arising. Um, and so this is going to be another dynamic, which is what will be kind of the universal driver to go into space. Now, some people argue it's to escape planet Earth because we've messed things up here. Maybe we can get it right if we go someplace else. I mean, but that's only shifting a problem from one geographic location to another. It doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Others will say we want to go to space because we want to learn more about the origins of the universe and all of those things. But in the end, when you look at it, people want to go into space because they see it as an economic and societal opportunity. And this is, for me, the really interesting part of it, because you don't need a grant from the king to go to space. You don't need anything other than to say, I have an idea, I can build something. All I got to do is find a launch vehicle and get some licenses. So where I think the where I think the most interesting work is going to be done is under what conditions will that occur, and are we going to have a unified set of principles for large operations in space, or is it going to be country by country? But again, I come back to, well, shouldn't civil society, which is the one that really wants to do this, shouldn't they have a role in putting all of that together, and then let the governments sort through how they react? Which is for me, it's fairly fascinating study in a whole bunch of issues.
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, it's all about, like you just said, opportunities. I mean, there's obviously a lot of philosophy conversation, but when it comes down almost to the basic needs of humanity, is over there representing, giving me more opportunities that I have here? Am I willing to risk the energy or the effort for what I can get, over there? And then for some, the promise of something better will oversee everything. So it's that's what these new places are always offering. When people come to me with the idea of, oh, so now we're going to go and mess up another location, another place after Earth. Well, I'm like, listen, every single child, when they leave the house, want to do better than their parents. It's not like the parents were waking up in the morning trying to do bad things. They do they do what they can with the tools and the knowledge, and with their own baggage and history. And then hopefully they're able to create children that will go on and not repeat the same mistake, but the children will make their own mistake, and then life continues. That is exactly the same thing that's going to happen as we go to space. We're going to space with the intent of doing things better, but we will run into our own challenges and struggles. And we need to make sure that we have a structure in place so that we can manage those. It has to be resilient, and not being idealistic and thinking is going to be, you know, kind of utopian world where everybody walks hand in hand and just goes out and travels to Mars. No, it's going to be complicated with a lot of different goals, and we have to be prepared for that. Now, Ken, in your work of looking for with the compact and finding the support, what has been the response? A lot of good energy of people saying, "Oh, finally, someone is taking the lead." But also, what has been the struggle in convincing people to put their stamp of approval?
It wasn't so much a struggle once we had a chance to talk with people about what we were trying to do. This is where I come to that the phrase I've used about the changing the paradigm in thinking. Uh, the first reaction many times was, well, the UN outer space committee will take care of this, um, or the ITU, or other large intergovernmental bodies. So why is this different? And so we again, we're explaining now is the time for civil society to step up to the plate and take responsibility for how we behave in space. It's not simply saying there's a problem, you, the government, solve it. And when they don't solve it, then we complain you haven't solved it. Or when they try to solve it and it's not what we want, then we complain to them. And eventually the government just throws up their hands or just says, okay, just live with what we've done. So it was more, why aren't we just putting these things down on paper, and why aren't we having kind of a collective view of what we think are the fundamental things that are important for us to be able to succeed. That and many times you had that you had that thinking with people like my age who who had come up over the decades in kind of the space arena. The younger entrepreneurs, when we talk, they kind of embraced this idea, because for them it was, I'm really focused on getting financing for the widget I want to build and all the other things, but I didn't realize at some point I've got to be spending money on not building something, but on taking care of paperwork. Now I'm using that as shorthand, but basically having to deal with the range of things that they would be required to do in order to be in space. And so I think that was kind of one of the big challenges, was getting over that hurdle, that this is not another kind of intergovernmental exercise. This was going to be driven by civil society, and civil society has to take responsibility for doing these things. And where they intersect with the government interests, then that's good. And so what we found is that people have been very enthusiastic. I mean, in many cases we've had folks say this is long overdue, and we're quite happy to see this kind of a discussion occur. And we're not suggesting at the Institute that we have all of the answers, but we do see this as a good starting point, and hopefully we can start shifting the discussions in the various fora that take place. So, every day, where international gatherings are there to look at one aspect of space or another, and what we want to do is foster this whole notion that the people that want to be up there and want to invest, they should be having some say in how the rules are set.
The earlier, when you were talking about the government, some of the challenges that the government creates by for the commercial, I was thinking about how the spacesuits are still considered weapons, and really hard for any companies to come in and exchange the technology, or have the trade between companies, because in the law, spacesuits are weapons, and no one is allowed to trade weapons unless obviously you're the government. So just changing these things that we don't even think about until they have to be. And like, I wouldn't be surprised that this is one of the reasons why SpaceX, you look at the guys who go up into the rocket, they don't have a spacesuit because they still have legislative issues on developing the technology that is still considered space weapons. Ken, what is the origin of the off-world approach coming from the Hague Institute for Global Justice? Because usually one person would not, like, if you send an email and your signature is the Hague Institute for Global Justice, one would not think, oh, okay, of course this is about space. How did that come to be, and for you to be where you are now?
Well, my colleague, Lady Sohair Salam, who is the president of the Hague Institute for Global Justice, contacted me very soon after I retired from the State Department in 2020, and said, I have just taken over this institute. It does good work, but I want something that's future oriented. And I was thinking, what about space? Uh, and uh, and she said, I want to do something for my grandkids. I want to look at something that will have an impact in the future. And space occurred to me. I'm not an expert in any of this. Do you have any ideas? And ironically enough, one of the pieces of unfinished business I had when I was at the State Department was, how do we get more civil society input into in the work we're doing? Now, we did that. Just to digress for a moment, we did that very successfully in the UN, particularly on the guidelines for the long-term sustainability of outer space, where in the program of work that we put together to start looking at this issue, we wanted to get experts involved. For my part, we worked very hard to keep in contact with the private sector, mostly through the trade associations rather than individual companies, and say, this is what we want to do. And so we'd like your input in making sure that we aren't going off the rails. We want the sustainability guidelines to be something that everybody can embrace. It took a little work to do that, but you've seen the success today of the guidelines, and I just listened to the webcast of the S&T subcommittee and their working group on long-term sustainability guidelines, and it's quite incredible to see how far we've come with that. And so I wanted to take that experience and using the Hague Institute as a platform for that was ideal. And Lady Sohair and really was quite visionary in recognizing that we could take that institute, because it is an international non-governmental organization, so it's a permanent body that has staff and everything else, so you can do follow-on work that you don't get with major conferences necessarily. A lot of good ideas, but people go home and it's up to somebody to take the initiative. So that whole notion of let's put together a civil society driven platform to look at governance was what we were trying to drive at. So over the course of the next couple of years after that, we put together the compact and finalized the draft on July 4th, 2022. And since then, we've been approaching one person at a time to bring them on board with the compact.
Now, if people want to find out more about the compact or the off-world approach, or if they want to maybe sign it or discover more, where do they have to go, or how is it available online on the site, or they have to contact you personally?
No, it's online at the site. It's the Hague Institute for Global Justice.org, and it's called the Off-World Approach. So you'll see all the other things that the institute is doing, but we have the Off-World Approach, and we have an advisory council to the Off-World Approach that provides input on the types of work that we want to do. But the Off-World Approach is kind of the standalone program. The compact was its first product, and we hope to have other things that we can study in greater detail or work on with other entities, including governments. I just want to add, we've talked with all of the the major space agencies and various government entities that are associated with space. So we've kept them aware of what we're doing. We've presented it to the UN Outer Space Committee. We've presented it to the UN Secretary General, and for their information. We aren't asking the UN to do anything specific with it, but we're quite open to cooperation and seeing where our work can be mutually supportive.
I'm pretty sure that your experience from the government aspect comes handy when dealing with these institutions, right?
Yes, it does. I mean, we don't have governments have not necessarily endorsed what we've done, but the other interesting thing about what we were trying to accomplish as well is at the international level, the issue of sustainability of space and good behavior in space takes on, it's not surprising, takes on a hugely governmental flavor to it. Because these issues have been discussed in terms of the governance in intergovernmental bodies, particularly in the UN and then bilaterally. And so what we also wanted to do is recognize that there is a political part to all of this. I mean, banning weapons in space, criticizing countries for poor behavior. Okay, those are all things that governments do. I mean, that's why they're there. But we didn't want the totality of the discussion on good behavior in space or the sustainability of space to be a function of what governments decide. And so we wanted to have a counterweight, if you will, and say, look, these are the things that we think are important. They overlap for the most part with what governments are discussing, but we also have these other issues. Personally, I think that in time governments will welcome this because it sheds a certain amount of work off their plate, where they aren't having to worry about, okay, what are we doing as governments, and then and then what's going to be the reaction domestically from our own companies. And you know we would really like kind of a release valve, if you will, in some other forum, so that those things that we really aren't interested in, but we know civil society is interested in, we don't have to take up. Maybe there's someplace else that they can do that. And I think that it's kind of a byproduct of what we put into place with the compact.
Is I mean, besides maybe they're not interested, but have you reached out to Chinese companies or Chinese individual to try to bring them into this conversation?
Yes, we have two non-governmental entities from China. In fact, an expert from China was on our drafting group for the compact. We have we have signatories from India, from Asia Pacific, as I said, from China, one entity from Russia, entities from Africa, South America, North America, and Europe. So we've been universal in terms of geography as well as sectors in the compact, and so we're continuing to contact people, and certainly going to the website, you'll have the contact information for anybody else that's interested in talking with us, because we would certainly welcome it. And as we move forward, the types of groups that we're beginning to make contact with, I would never have imagined 2 years ago, which is really exciting, because you just see the breadth of interest in space and the real innovation that's occurring in areas that you would not think of.
Well, congratulations on the amazing work, and we'll make sure that all the links are in the description on how to reach you, how to find more about the Compact, the Hague Institute for Global Justice, and the off-world approach. Ken, I always end these conversations because I'm always interviewing people that have a wealth of knowledge, and not just career-wise, but as humans. So my last question is always the same. What are the three words? What are your three words of wisdom? Ken's three words of wisdom.
Well, I mean, the first was being a contrarian, um, because I think that for the space enterprise, it always has to be someone says you can't do that, and it's well, why not? Now it's more for me. I'm not an engineer or a scientist or anything, but if someone says you can't do this, you can't build a structure on the moon. Well, why? Why not? Well, because the moon belongs to everybody. Okay, that's fine, but how do you take care of that? I think the other thing, other word I would use is flexibility. The legacy of this space governance has been extreme flexibility, extreme in a very positive way. There's a problem internationally, and we've solved it through treaties, through informal coordination mechanisms, through associations, through bilateral agreements, through multilateral agreements among a small number of countries. I think you're going to need that flexibility in things like insurance, in finance, and I think that's really going to be crucial in the future. And then the other one is just imagination. What is it that I can do? Again, going back to the carpenter, the plumber, and the electrician. Why aren't we getting into the vocational and technical institutes here, at least in the United States, where I've advocated for this, and explaining we need way down in the supply chain people who make space their profession, and you may never go to space, but you're going to build things for it, and we'll probably need a plumber up on a space station someday, or an electrician, or a carpenter, or a welder on the moon putting things together. So those are kind of the things I would keep in mind, or I do keep in mind as I move forward.
Well, great words of wisdom. I always make an effort to point the difference between can't and doesn't work. Can't is like there's no longevity to it. It's a point of either opposition or direction, but there's no manual of instruction. Like it doesn't lead to anything, as opposed to it doesn't work. Well, then the problem is a solution, right? If it doesn't work this way, then you can work some other ways. And as we talk about, Antarctica, the moon, can't doesn't lead to anything. It just like it's not involving anything after, but it doesn't work. And I think that for me, that's the insight, the wisdom. It's figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what not what you can and can't, but what works, what doesn't work, and what works today often doesn't work tomorrow, and it demands maintenance. So it's more of a relationship as opposed to this kind of singular affirmation or opposition. So that's one thing um, that I'm always careful to make a difference. Ken, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so very much, and I'm looking forward for our next face to face, whether in DC or on the road. But I'm looking forward to see the compact and the off-world approach grow, and the message to continue to influence the work, because obviously it's a value proposition. It's a foundation build of values and principles on how we want to shape the future. And your work and with Lady Sawyer is commendable. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for being part of the compact, which is really great. And I look forward to talking with you again.
Excellent. Thank you, Ken.
We could do this for 3 hours.
Yes, we sure can. With maybe 2 bottles of wine then, but yeah.
Yeah.
Bye, Ken.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you.